Transfer portal season has begun.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you can start with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers on this Monday. Just a quick reminder to everybody out there, wherever you're listening to this podcast, watching it on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment down below with whatever transfer portal player you think should come to Washington, because we got a lot of fun to talk about today. We love hearing from all the everydayers out there. Lars, we're going to get into Washington being selected to play in the Sun Bowl against Louisville. We're going to talk about some positions to watch outside of the trenches, because we know that that's obviously where the majority of the upgrades need to be made for Washington. And that's what we're starting with today, because the transfer portal is, as the everydayers will listen to this, on Monday, December 9th, officially open.
It's portal season. Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of funny where Jedd was asked, where Jedd was answering some questions about, hey, we've had some discussions with the team and players and et cetera, and we'll continue to do this. I hopped on the Zoom call with him after Sunday when he did his separate press conference up at UW on Monday or on Sunday earlier in the afternoon. And he's like, look, it's the transfer portal period. We're kind of always just evolving those conversations. Those conversations don't have a start and stop date. We're kind of just evolving as we go. And I think that kind of speaks to the nature of the portal and the position Washington's in, where you can look today and say, hey, maybe they need these guys and this guys at this position and that position. And then a week from now, you're talking about, hey, these two other guys decided to enter the portal surprisingly. And now we got to maybe add another position group into that, where I think the obvious ones that we're talking about, aside from the treasure, which a separate segment is in the second segment, is, tight end. Now you're looking at Arizona's Keanu Burnett entering the portal on Sunday. And there's a number of other guys that have entered. And so you're just looking at it thinking, you're going into the portal period thinking a couple of things, and it's going to continue to evolve as you go on.
So speaking of things that we're thinking of, we have to, this conversation needs to start with Wendell Mo, where it's Arizona interior offensive lineman. He played a lot of right guard when Jedd Fisch's coaching staff was still there. He was an all Pac-12 second teamer, I believe, according to the AP, during the 2023 season. And this is somebody who, Lars, you and I had heard some rumors about him potentially mulling the transfer portal earlier on in 2024. Obviously, decided to stick the 2024 season out at Arizona. And Arizona just didn't have a lot of success under Brent Brennan for one reason or another. We're not going to get into that. But what we are going to get into is, I feel like he's one guy where, there are a lot of players that you can speculate. Be like, oh, is this player coming to Washington? Is that player? One guy that I know you and I are both really, really high on is Baklenko, the offensive tackle from Stanford, where that's one guy where you look at him and you say, hey, you'd love to do whatever you can to get a guy like that to come to Washington. We'll talk about some guys on the defensive line, same thing over obviously the course of the week as we start to hear some things. But I look at Wendell Mo, and especially with his fit in Washington's offense, knowing Jedd Fisch is not only his scheme, but his culture as well. That's one guy where I feel like it's fair to say this. If he goes anywhere other than Washington, it's going to be a surprise. Not, trying to say, hey, this is what we're hearing, but that's just what it feels like at this point in time.
Well, and the fact that you mentioned Wendell Mo, what position did he play? Left guard.
Interior offensive line. Yeah.
But specifically left guard. And the reason why I bring that up is the question that we had, does guard Memolard decide to go, come back? Does Wendell Mo kick over to right guard? Either way, I think you look at it.
No, sorry, but that's what I'm saying. He played right guard in 2023 when Brennan Carroll and Jedd Fisch were still down there. So it's one of those things where he's got the flexibility. He's got 25 starts under his belt, where he could play both if he wanted him to.
No, exactly. I just wanted to say, I wanted to clarify, getting an interior offensive line can play either or, and I'm glad you mentioned that it's 23, because 24 he played primarily on the left guard.
Yes.
Whether guard decides to come back or not, you need to add a guard starter this offseason in the portal. We love what they did in the high school ranks, getting depth along the offensive line. None of those guys are starting. And that's no slight to any of those guys. You could have signed a 5-star, and it would still be a outside in looking shot that he would start, only because how rare is it that an offensive lineman starts year one in college? It's very, very rare. But going and getting a guy like Wendell Mo allows guard to say, hey, you know what, whether I could stay or go, come back, whatever. Or maybe, who knows, maybe I flip to the right side and Wendell stays at left. in terms of what he did in 24. Either way, that's what we're looking at, because we saw, and I'm glad, again, you mentioned the whole comparison of 23 and 24. Enoch played right guard, left guard, and I think he also played a couple snaps at tackle. I don't have the PF. I'm looking at Arizona's PFF off the top of my head here, but it shows that Brendan is more than willing to not say, hey, you are specifically the only person that it applies to is Drew as a party. Drew staying on the right side. Aside from that, everybody else can kind of mix and match, and that's no slight at Drew. We just saw what happened when he moved over to left tackle. Just keep him on the right side. And I think keeping that cohesion, maybe getting another veteran guy next to him will also help, because Enoch, I think, did help him a little bit this season, but getting another guy that already knows the Brennan system. I think that's kind of the sticking point why Wendell Moe is such a high priority, because you talk about the Stanford tackle and other guys. You're not just going to go back and raid Arizona's roster, even though, again, in hindsight, man, some of those guys have to be regretting that decision, one way or another. And so getting familiarity is one thing, but also you're probably going to need to add, what do you think, at least 2 interior guys, just because you want to have some depth pieces as well.
I'm curious to see how that works, just with a lot of the guys that they took from the high school ranks. And, because part of this depends on the progression on the offensive line of not only Pocky Finau, but Michael Watkins as well, where those are a couple of guys that they're really high on. And obviously, due to where the position was this past season, they were both higher up on the depth chart. And I think just coaching staffs might be typically comfortable with. I'm not trying to knock their talent. I think they're both really exciting players with a lot of upside, but just in terms of where they are in terms of their development, it might've been a little bit early for a couple of them. And, maybe we see Pocky a little bit in the Sun Bowl, because that game doesn't count against their eligibility, anything like that. So curious to see how that works out for both those guys moving forward. But Lars, before we move on, we also need to talk defensive line here a little bit, where I feel like this has gone a little bit better for Washington in terms of just guys that have entered the portal, where you look around and you can say, ooh, where, whatever name it is that you want to throw out there, that there are a lot of really, really talented bodies that you can take, whether they be, I prefer, especially on the interior, guys with a proven track record of production, wherever it is that you want to point. And I think it's just a matter of, all right, let's go out there and let's see Washington close the deal with 1, 2, maybe even 3 of these guys.
Exactly. Well, but the other thing to mention in that is, yes, you want guys that are established that you don't have to coach up, but like we talked with Jameer Otis, where it's like you can take a former 5-star who maybe hasn't had a ton of playing time compared to what his high school ranking was, and pair that with guys who have maybe started at the FCS level or started at the FBS level at a G5 school, because you don't want to just take flyers, but you also don't want to take guys where, hey, this guy has 40 starts at, don't take this the wrong way, Sebastian Valdez, but Montana State, or, some FCS school on a lower level, like a G5 or G6, I'm trying to think, maybe like a Tulane guy, right? Where no slight to those players, but you want to make sure you're not having to force the level up too much, where you can coach them up a certain point. But we've kind of seen over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, those FCS guys end up needing a little more coaching before they can truly be characterized as, hey, this guy was an impact starter here. It's a plug and play situation. That's why those Jameer Otises, those higher level caliber guys, are really more of an onus for the staff.
So I completely agree with you there. And that's where I look at the portal, and when we hear more names on the defensive line, obviously one of the first places we're going to share those with our Locked On Huskies insiders, which the link to that's down in the description below, by the way, you should go check that out. But on top of that, I don't like, the more I look at it, the more I say, all right, if you want to go get an edge, obviously we talked about Lance Holtzclaw and Maurice Himes entering the transfer portal. Maybe there'll be a guy out there where I look at that and say, if you want, we talked about Deshaun Warner the other day, where if you want to take a guy like that, I get it. I don't know if it's necessarily the biggest need, but I look at the interior and I say, yeah, getting a guy like that in the Sebastian Valdez mold would be great. But finding a Jaheim Otis, some of these other guys that are out there on the interior, like look at what's going on at Texas A&M, like those guys just very clearly never got coached up. And if one of them, we've seen that before, obviously it's a different situation with Jeremiah Martin, but we look at bodies like that and you say, all right, these guys who have all the potential in the world that you really want, you trust your coaching staff to find a way to develop, and at the same point you can come in and just say, all right, we trust this guy for 15-20 snaps a game right now because we know he can make an impact. Those are things we want to see. We're really curious to see how that plays out. But Lars, there's more than just the trenches to watch. which we'll get to right after a message from our friends over at Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. So, Lars, let's talk other positions. We love talking about the trenches. We know that's what it takes to win in the Big Ten, but Washington is going to be looking for some other upgrades. Is there any one position that stands out to you and you say, yes, I know they need another guy there?
So let's just start with 2, 1 offense, 1 defense.
Sure.
Defense, linebacker. Yep. I think there's enough defensive backs and cornerbacks that you can kind of make that work on the roster. Similar on offense to wide receiver. What's the other position you need on offense? Tight end. Those are the 2. So linebacker and tight end are kind of the 2 that I view, but in a little bit of different regard, because you're probably getting Quentin Moore back, as Jedd Fisch has alluded to, but coming off the injury, you just kind of want some more reassurances at a veteran presence at that position. Same thing to be said with linebacker, where you like Kamori House coming back with a full season as a freshman. Devin Bryant's done some nice things. You have Hayden Moore, the transfer from Michigan. We haven't seen him do a ton this season, which again is not necessarily surprising given the veterans at the position, similar to last season where it's like, hey, how come these guys didn't start last year? It's like, well, Carson couldn't beat out Eddie. God forbid you can't beat out a 5th-year senior. Like, that's the sign of a good program. It's now Carson is taking that position. Same thing with Alfonso, and leveled it up. Now you kind of want to at least get one position, at least one linebacker at, with at least a year or 2 of starting experience, just to kind of help ease the position. Not necessarily a Brian Parham type, more so a true middle linebacker that you can kind of just say, you know what, whether Kamori pops or not at middle linebacker or outside linebacker, whichever one you want to call him, or Devin Bryant emerges, that's a good problem to be in. And I think that's kind of how they're going to evaluate that linebacker position in particular.
So I certainly agree with you, where I wouldn't be surprised if you look at the position and it's a 1-year, just high production sort of guy. We're not necessarily in the Brian Parham mold where we're looking at a lot of linebackers from, whether it be the G5, G6 around the country. That's, oh yeah, this guy's got 130 tackles, 140 tackles, whatever it is. I feel like you see one of those guys enter the transfer portal every other day, where I think whatever you do at that position is going to be very telling for not just necessarily what Robert Bala thinks of his position moving forward, but just how he feels about his 3 freshmen, where you and I have talked extensively about Zajus Rainey-Saleh, about Jonathan Epperson, Donovan Robinson, where it's not just those guys, though. It's how does he feel about Devin Bryant? How does he feel about Hayden Moore? Where moving forward, it's, all right, are you going to expect those guys to step up, or do you think they need 1 more year? Which, if they need 1 more year, that seems okay with the position that they're in and the guys that they took in the 2025 class, where, all right, if that's the route you want to go, fine. That's, obviously it's your decision. But we need to flip to the offensive side here for a minute, because we need to talk tight end, where there are a couple guys. You highlighted Jackson Bowers a few weeks ago as a guy you really don't like. You talked about Kean Burnett a few minutes ago as somebody else from Arizona who entered the transfer portal. I don't, just from Arizona, but I don't know if you need to take 2 guys at the position. Where I look at it and, getting Austin Simmons is a really nice take. You and I really like his film. Obviously, Baron Naone is a really fun prospect to watch. Shout out to our buddy Jake Butt, who did a fantastic breakdown on him for the Big Ten Network during signing day. That's if you haven't watched that, definitely go watch it. It's like a minute long, but he did a really good job of breaking down everything that Baron brings to the table. But and the reason I bring that up is because I don't know if you need 2 guys. Where we saw what Decker DeGraff did this season. We know Quentin Moore is coming back. We know Charlie Crowell is going to be coming back off an injury, where obviously we'll see how the whole Ryan Otten situation plays out with the injuries he had, which is just really unfortunate. But I look at, probably one of those 2 guys in Jackson Bowers, who was strongly considering Washington out of high school, and Kean Burnett is somebody who obviously has a strong relationship with Jordan Paopao, as the guys who it's, hey, maybe it's one of those 2 that ends up coming up here, a situation to monitor.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's a good position to be in where, again, you can't control who goes in the portal, but seeing Kean go into the portal, thinking, okay, cool, that could be like and this is no slight to him, but maybe like your 2nd or 3rd target, where Jackson, I think, without question, has to be priority 1. at tight end, not on the board, but just at tight end, at least until I haven't seen a ton of other guys pop in the portal yet. Could be not. But you just look at what Jackson.
There's some good names out there.
No, and don't get me wrong, but it's like I think that's why you would classify it as. I agree, you take only one tight end, but still probably offer 3 or 4 and tell them all. Whoever takes it. Similar to high school, where it's like, hey, we're looking at 2 quarterbacks. Whichever one of you guys gets it. Like that's how they're going to have to go about this, because you don't want to necessarily put all your eggs in the Jackson Bowers basket, and then he decides to at the 11th hour sign with Georgia, God forbid, another Bowers going to Georgia. But one of those, no relation, I believe, to Brock. I don't believe there's any relationship.
No, none.
Just to be clear, except for the last name. But in that sort of thing, because and I don't think Jedd would do that, where they're going to put all their eggs in one basket. But similarly, I don't think they're going to lowball the position in terms of, let's just go get Keon because we have that relationship and we're not even going to try for other guys. I think Jedd's competitive enough in the portal, and as we've seen on the recruiting show, we're not going to shy away from the big time battles here. The Marcus Harris's, the Dylan Robinsons of the world, who had multiple significant offers to go towards. But at the same point, you do only need one, so it's a matter of which one fits best and how quickly can you close on them. Because I think this is something we talked about on the show previously, where getting them on campus has been easy for Washington in the portal. They've gotten a ton of guys on campus for visits in the portal, Marcus Bryant, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. It's when those guys leave.
Right.
That's been the problem. And I'm not saying, and almost in a way, treat it like a free agency visit in the NFL. Don't give him a reason to leave the office. Do not give him a reason to leave the complex. Sure. Now, I know it's going to be harder for some guys than others, but this staff has the resources, as we well know, and as we have documented very well, both on our respective websites and on this podcast, to make that pitch, to say, you know what, Jackson, we can overvalue you a little bit in terms of, potential figure that we could, that could be in play for you. But also, when you look at the position, why not? Like, look at what this offense can do with Damon, with all these guys. And you are the go-to guy. That doesn't mean Quentin Moore can't be, but as we've said, Quentin Moore is kind of a blocking tight end. So Decker DeGraff has been the second receiving tight end. So pairing Jackson with Decker would be a perfect combination because Charlie's a better blocker. Baronione is a better blocker. You can still bring those guys along as a pass catcher, but more so knowing that their playing time is going to be utilized as blockers more so than anything else.
So I certainly agree with you there. You mentioned pass catchers, and I wanted to mention wide receiver, where I heard from somebody the other day where, hey, there's a name to keep an eye on. We shared it with our insiders. We're going to let that one sit for another couple of days. Very, very curious to see what happens with him. But I look at receiver as somebody who, hey, they might be in the market for a big bodied guy, where we saw how Jeremiah Hunter was used this season. We talked about it ad nauseum on the show, where it was a little disappointing, but it seems like they really like having a guy like that in their offense. And it's just something to keep an eye on right now. I didn't want to spend too long on it, but you look at the mold that Denzel Boston is in, and then all of a sudden on top of that, there's Justice Williams, who we know he wasn't suited for the majority of the season due to an injury, but that's a guy who you and I both loved his film. Just absolutely loved his high school film. We're really curious to see what he might look like in spring practice and moving forward. But having one more guy in that just big outside receiver mold seems like something that's really important to this coaching staff, especially when you go around and you look at the rest of the guys on the roster, where I think Rasheed Williams could fill a role like that, but he's 6'1" compared to, a 6'4" Justice Williams and Denzel Boston, where that's more the route that I'm talking about here. And then, you look on the inside where, the list goes on and on of the Kevin Greens, Keith Reynolds, Jason Robinson, Audric Harris, all the guys in this class, whether it be Chris Lawson, Marcus Harris, Raiden Vinesbright. It goes on and on and on about these guys who aren't necessarily the biggest, or they're not the smallest either. But I'm just curious to see what happens there, because Lars, the reason I wanted to move on from that so quickly is we have to talk about the secondary, where I feel like there might be room for 2 guys, maybe one experienced corner, and then one safety as well.
Go get Julio Humphreys. I swear to God, it's not probably going to happen. But just like in the same mold of, go get one of those hot. That's the same thing we talked about with Jimmy Rodas, where a guy who was a 4 or 5 star prospect hasn't necessarily had a ton of experience in playing time at a high level school. But it does seem like, with how Elijah Jackson was viewed, how Leroy Bryant came along this season, not that we don't like either of those guys potentially coming back long term, but you just kind of look at it and say, could you use one more lockdown cornerback opposite price talk next season? probably with Thaddeus Dixon gone. Look at the secondary with the safety, and I mean Jordan Shaw, I think, has handled the nickel position more than fine. But you look at that safety position, where do you want to add another experienced body there just to make sure? Because again, you have 6+ underclassmen at that position, thinking, okay, we don't need a 2-year guy. We just need that similar to linebacker, 1-year rental, 1-year mercenary to say, you know what, let's just plug and play. And we can still, because here's the thing, you can still play. Dangerous Rainy Sally could play 12 games next season, 13 games, however many they play, but still not start. And I think that might be the similar course of action with a safety or a cornerback where, hey, look, we can still bring these younger guys along, but just make sure that he is still 1A at the end of the day.
2 things on that. We saw that this season with Peyton Waters, where that's a guy who we're really excited about. We think is going to be a really good player long-term. We saw him play in every game, but mainly on special teams. And the coaching staff still said, we need to find a way to get this guy on the field. And I feel like we could see that at corner where, we saw it with Kamari House and Brian Parham, where if you get beat out by a guy below you, this coaching staff is not afraid of competition. They want to make sure that it works in whatever way possible. We could see that at corner where, let's say they bring somebody in and all of a sudden, whoever, you want to say Caleb Presley, Curly Reed, Leroy Bryant, anybody in just that they've taken moving forward, Elias Johnson, just to throw another name out there, where all those guys, if all of a sudden they take a huge leap forward and they're better than whoever it is that you brought in, fine. This coaching staff is not afraid to play young guys and find ways to make it work, which is really, really interesting. And Lars, that's something we might see a lot of in the Sun Bowl, which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Got Monday Night Football coming up tonight. Bengals, Cowboys. Not a huge fan of either defense in this game, so give me the overs on catches for both Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb and yards, and give me an anytime touchdown for both. Go check all those out, and all those odds and so many more out over on FanDuel. Lars, Sun Bowl, where I talked about we're potentially going to see a lot of young guys in this game. And at the same point, one thing that Jedd Fisch told us during his Sunday press conference is outside of guys who are injured, he mentioned Zach Durfee, Russell Davis as guys who aren't going to play due to injury. He expects everybody to play. He doesn't expect anyone to sit out, anything like that. Jack McAllister, who entered the transfer portal, is going to be the punter for the game. But that's something where I'm curious to see what this is going to look like with, once again, Damon Williams at the helm.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw it in a way against Oregon where they played some younger guys, some reserve guys, got them a lot more snaps. I don't know necessarily if this is going to be the type of game because I agree with what you're saying where the younger guys could get some reps. I think it might be more into the bowl prep and kind of just see which guys end up maybe taking that next step in the bowl prep, because you think about it, you still want to win the game. You're not just trying to play a bunch of freshmen and just say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we lost, say 30-24 or 30-20 to Louisville. Yeah, it's a tough loss. But if you're doing that by playing a bunch of freshmen like Audric, and it's no slight to the freshmen, but you would think okay, you want the senior class to go out with a win, with some confidence, while also still, maybe if Peyton Waters gets a career high in snaps, but still isn't a starter, that sort of thing. I could see a situation like that playing out. But this isn't a game where you want to just not necessarily mail it in, but just play way more freshmen that you had been accustomed to, only because you want to say, hey, we're trying to get more guys, starts or appearances. Say, hey, we have this many freshmen coming back who have played in games. It's like that stat only matters if they're more meaningful snaps, like what Peyton Waters has done on special teams and all those sorts of things. Not just, let's say Audric gets in the game, because Audric burned his red shirt, but still hasn't really played like you would think in terms of the usage and things like that if you're going to burn his red shirt. So that might be a guy where, hey, does he take Jeremiah's spot if Jeremiah decides to go pro or transfer and things like that? One thing to clarify, though, Jedd did say of the guys that will enter the portal, the difference is once you start taking visits. So if Lance Holtzclaw starts taking visits, Maurice Hines starts taking visits, anybody else that enters the portal, then they're now considered out. But until then, which I think is interesting with the whole Jack McAllister thing, I think it's how does Adam Saul feel about that? Those sorts of things. But aside from that, you're still likely leaning with the veteran presence that you have been, sprinkled in with a few more freshmen.
Yeah, where Jedd Fisch, he called it a championship mindset that he wants to go into this game with. And it's one of those things where it feels like that's just one of his coachisms, where it's, hey, yeah, we want to make sure we treat it like a postseason game because that's what it is. And this is our last game of the year. We want to treat it that way. We're going to celebrate the guys, all that sort of stuff. That's great. I don't have any problem with that personally. And so, of course, you're going to go into it with the playing the win. But I also look at it from, all right, we have seen what you got from a lot of the young guys all year. But if some of these other ones want to suit up, I'm glad you mentioned Audric Harris, where that's a big one. I look on the defensive side where do you want to give Rashawn Clark a bunch of snaps, Peyton Waters, again, whoever it might be, Curly Reed, Caleb Presley, just over the course of the game where there might be some guys that were going to come back, whether it be, an Ephesians Prysock at this point, or just some of these other guys. I'm trying to just give a name at a position where we know about everybody who's behind him. Maybe the defensive line. I feel like that's at edge rusher where we've seen what the rotation has been all season long, but maybe it just gets a little deeper where you want to send Voitanufi out on a high note and things like that, but maybe you see a little more Jacob Lane, a little more Jaden Wayne, different things like that as well.
Bryce Butler with that similar move where he's only played 3 games. You look at, I'm trying to think of some other guys who have played 3. Devin Bryan's played 3. Other than that's what's kind of interesting about how this class is broken down. You just look at it, it's like there's either 10 games, 9 games, 12 games, or 3 or 1 games. It's like there's no in between of, hey, he played 6, 7 games. That's why that's why I keep bringing back Audric, is it's so intriguing. Curly Reed is one that I'm glad you mentioned Curly Reed, because that's the one that intrigues me. Where signed with the Boers staff, had a big relationship with Courtney Morgan. There was no Juice Brown connection. I'll just be clear about that. So with that being said, you look at it and think, well, he hasn't played a ton this season. Does he go for 1 game and then enter the bowl and try and use that as a springboard, that sort of thing? Because at the other side of the equation, some of these guys might also enter the portal between now and when the bowl game happens. And I say that to say we haven't seen a ton of guys. So if some of those guys say, hey, you know what? I signed with the last, and we're not naming names. I'm not naming Curly in this situation. I just use him as an example. But anybody that signed with the DeBoer's class, Tristan Dunn, for example, who's played this season but hasn't played as much as we thought, do those guys say, hey, we're going to enter the portal? And then you can see some of the other freshmen vault up, like a Peyton Waters, and say, you know what? The reps that Tristan got, we'll give to Peyton, or we'll give to Raheem Wright, those sort of things. You look at those situations and think, and I think that's why I wanted to mention that thing that Jedd said, where those conversations are ever evolving. So as we look on December 9th, what does the portal look like versus December 18th? What does the portal look like? When is the window closed? Do you remember off the top of your head? It's a 20-day window.
It's 20 days, so it'll be the 29th.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure that the 18th day wasn't inconsequential to being post date of what I said. But you just look at, so you have 2.5-ish weeks to decide who's going to be in the portal. I think that's why those conversations are still ongoing. So guys that we throw out could be in the game, might also be entering the portal and just looking for a new home. And that's I will give Jedd this credit. That's an interesting, unique balance to have, to say, you know what, you can enter the portal and go find your home after the game, versus, hey, you know what, if you enter the portal, we're just going to move on from the guys we have, go take your visits. Because how many guys have come back after entering the portal? Not very many.
I agree with you there. And this is one thing that I'm really curious about. And as these things continue to evolve, it's a lot of these guys might already be committed by this point in time, where, because obviously when the portal window's open, it's a very long process. It's a very, very confusing process.
Convoluted.
Convoluted. That's the best way to put it. But I agree with you where, it's a very fine line to walk, and there's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to managing the transfer portal. And I asked him about it. I said, hey, how hard is it to at the same time prep for a bowl game? Because this is a good Louisville team. We're going to get way more into this over the next couple of weeks. But on top of just that, it's how hard is it to, recruit in the transfer portal? And Jedd obviously brings up signing a high school class and everything. He's like, we're hoping to be able to prep for a Big Ten championship game one of these years and have to do that as well, while, also trying to game plan and do all these other things. It's like, all those things are fair. I get that. But you got to give him some credit for that. And the more I look at this moving forward, the one thing I'm most curious about in this game, and I'm curious to get your take on this as well, I want to bring it back around to that championship quote to wrap this up, where you and I have spent some time comparing this team to the 2015 Washington team that had a lot of really good pieces, Budda Baker, Sidney Jones, that the whole just death row secondary, and then obviously John Ross, Jake Browning, Miles Gaskin, all those guys who were playing, I was going to say all as true freshmen, but John Ross wasn't. But I look at that team and I say they went and they won the Heart of Dallas Bowl. That's what it was. I was trying to remember to make sure I got that part right. But they went and they won the Heart of Dallas Bowl. They beat Southern Mississippi, and all of a sudden they're 10-2 the next year. Where Louisville is certainly not Southern Mississippi. Let's be real, even though that was a good Southern Miss team. Not going down that rabbit hole today. But I look at this team and I say, all right, when I look at what Jedd is trying to build, what is this going to look like? Because can we see a win in the Sun Bowl? It is a New Year's Eve bowl game, which that's also a separate discussion. But I look at all those things and I say, can this be, if we look back at this team on December 8th in 2025 and say, can we look at this game and say that was a springboard?
I agree. Ironic coincidence that both happened in the state of Texas. And I know Jedd said that, hey, we're making inroads in the state of Texas. Like, well, you signed one kid this past year, so that's a start, I guess. But and you got Omar Khan in 24. So with that being said, it's interesting, and I think that's why Damon will start the game. Why Jedd was adamant after the Oregon game that Damon was going to start, because everything is about building to next year. It's not necessarily a slight. Where that's why we had said throughout the season, if you bench Will in week 6, that's a little bit more of an indictment where, look, you're just letting the natural progression go. You get to a bowl game, everybody gets to be happy. But this is really about, I'm curious about the usage rate of Adam Muhammad, somebody like that, where you see so many freshmen that are going to be key pieces next year, maybe even another Peyton Waters, where all these guys, this is about, no pun intended, planting their flag in this bowl game. And, I think Jedd used the phrase, Damon's got to put his foot down and that sort of thing, where it's I think Damon's going to plant his foot and throw up his back foot or plant it and run, whichever one it is. This is the springboard that we're going to look back to. So I would imagine a win in this game, no matter how close or not, is going to be a significant springboard going into next season, because now Damon's going to say, hey, I do have a win under my belt in a start and those sorts of things. And you can build the confidence of it. Versus, okay, well, if Will is starting and Damon comes in off the bench and does his spark plays that he had been doing for most of the season, it takes a little bit of zing off of it, if you will.
I agree. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Not for your second listen. Check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy Craig Sheeman was the Big Ten first. When everyone else overlooks it, you can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever else you listen to your podcast. And please make sure that in that same vein, you subscribe wherever you get this podcast, because we're everywhere. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel, new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.